Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BBBofC on Twitter. Of course, you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. Want to talk about a couple of different things today. We'll start off discussing Conor Benn and him relinquishing his license following the board's decision to uphold the allegations of misconduct. A lot of people are saying that this is an indirect admission of guilt. We're going to discuss that and talk about the other possible motives for Conor Benn to do something like this. It may very well be an indirect admission of guilt, as some people are saying, or it could be something else. So we'll look into that. I also want to talk about Lomachenko. He's been put on the spot and he's been asked in an interview between Tank Davis, Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson, who is the best lightweight. And it was interesting to me that the interviewer actually left out Ryan Garcia from the conversation. We'll talk about all that and discuss why Lomachenko may have given the answer he's given and how that might also link in and marry into the theories of Paulie Malignaggi, which we've already discussed on this channel. We'll start off with Conor Benn. The British board released a statement to say that on the 17th of October, they called Conor Benn before them to deal with allegations of misconduct pursuant to Rule 25.1.1. We'll discuss that in a moment because it becomes relevant to a statement put out by Conor Benn. The hearing itself took place on the 21st of October. Conor Benn did have legal representation present, but on the morning of that hearing, he voluntarily relinquished his license with the British Board of Boxing Control. The allegations of misconduct against Conor Benn were then upheld. Now, if you look at the chapter and verse that is relevant here, it states that misconduct shall mean conduct detrimental to the interests of boxing or the public interest and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing shall include A. Any breach of these rules and regulations. B. Any failure to comply with an order made by the board or an area council. C. Any failure to honour any contractual obligation. D. Any attempt directly or indirectly to induce the breaking of any contractual obligation. Or C. Incompetence. Now, why is this relevant? Because Conor Benn has put out a statement. It's written in the third person, so it's fair to assume that a legal team wrote this rather than Conor himself. It says Conor's focus at this time is solely on clearing his name. The board, however, has made it extremely difficult for Conor to focus on doing that by its conduct of an unfair and biased procedure. In such circumstances, Conor decided not to renew his license, which had lapsed. Conor told the board that if it did not accept that his license had lapsed, then he renounces it. He strongly refutes the allegations of misconduct, which, here's the important part, which, for the avoidance of doubt, is not in relation to the VADA issue, and firmly believes that an independent tribunal will reach a wholly different conclusion. At an appropriate time, Conor will speak out on this and on the doping allegation to the extent that he can whilst legal proceedings are ongoing. In the meantime, he reiterates in no uncertain terms that he is a clean athlete. Well, we saw that the rules and regulations were quite vague. I mean, what does it mean to not be in the interests of boxing? It can mean a whole bunch of things. Having an adverse finding in your drugs test quite clearly is not in the interest of boxing. But if it's not related to that, what is this in relation to? Was there some other form of misconduct that they're accusing him of? Now, is this an admission of guilt, as a lot of people are saying? Well, not necessarily. That's not to say he's not guilty, by the way. But the motive might not be because of anything like that. It's not a case of, oh no, I'm guilty, I need to run and hide for the mountains, for the woods. Sonny Edwards put out a tweet to say Big Baby Miller loopholed his original ban because he didn't have a license. If Ben hasn't been served a ban yet, I'm not sure if he can be banned now. Just as he doesn't hold a license, who's going to ban him? Now, going back to a TalkSport article from March in 2022, whereby they were talking about the Jarrell Miller situation, they explained that, and I quote, the unbeaten heavyweight was previously due to face Anthony Joshua in 2019, but he failed multiple tests, and so his place was taken by Andy Ruiz. Back then, he escaped a significant punishment due to a loophole in the US boxing system. He did not hold a boxing license at the time and so was unable to be reprimanded by the New York Commission. As a result, in early 2020, Miller signed with Bob Arum's Top Rank and was due to come back against Jerry Forrest in July of that year. However, he tested positive once more and the bout was cancelled. This time, Miller was punished as the Nevada Commission did license him and therefore handed him a 2-year ban. Now, there's two things there. Firstly, isn't it interesting how Bob Arum's Top Rank did try to sign him up and get him to fight Jerry Forrest in July of that year? So this idea that Eddie Hearn's this sneak and there's nobody else like him. Come on now. Behave yourselves, guys. Behave yourselves. That's not to defend Eddie Hearn, but let's not pretend he's a snake among the saints. And talking about what Sonny Edwards is essentially implying here is that this is a tactical approach. Conor Benn is trying to smother himself in Teflon like John Gotti to make nothing stick. It's a preemptive, protective maneuver to get out of this, basically, and avoid a ban. Now, is that self-smothering in Teflon an admission of guilt, like a lot of people are saying? And they're saying, look at the way he's acting like a guilty man. Not necessarily. Now, that doesn't mean he's innocent, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's not necessarily an admission of guilt. I want to give you an analogy. Let's say you've been working in a foreign country for the last 5 years, and you've been doing very well there, so you decided you're going to settle up there full-time, and you decide that you're going to get a citizenship in that country. So you acquire a passport, and you are now also a citizen of that nation. In that country, they have very strict alcohol laws, but they only apply them to their own citizens. If you're caught drinking in that nation, you're going to be very, very strictly reprimanded by the authorities. When it comes to foreign nationals, though, because they want to attract investment, and they realize that in the Western world, part of the social culture is to drink, they don't apply it. They say, yeah, this law is only applicable to our own citizens. Well, you hit a night out with a bunch of friends that are visiting you, and they're allowed to drink. You're a citizen, you're not. And you're all sitting at a table, and all of a sudden this club that you're at is raided by the police. As they walk over to your table, they see you sitting in front of you is a glass of whiskey, and there's bottles of alcohol all over the place. Now, your defense might be, this is not my drink. My friend got up from this seat, went to hit the dance floor, so I scooted over and I decided that I was going to chat to my other friend. So it just happens to be that this glass of alcohol is in front of me. Now, whether you're guilty or not, we don't yet know. There's going to be a trial. There's going to be due process. If you're guilty, though, you're in trouble. So your lawyer turns to you and says, don't risk it. Whether you're guilty or not, it's irrelevant. There's a danger here that even if you're innocent, you're going to receive a strict sentence. If you relinquish your citizenship of this nation, you will instantly count as a foreign national, and they won't be able to do anything about it. What are you going to do? You may very well give up that citizenship. Not because you're guilty, but it's a protective, preventative, preemptive measure to smother yourself in Teflon so nothing can stick. And maybe that's what Conor Benn's doing, and it's not an admission of guilt. Or, of course, you might say to yourself, listen, man, I know I'm guilty. They're going to breathalyze me. I need to get rid of this citizenship quickly because then I can't get into trouble. So whether he's guilty or not, he could still go down that route as a protective, tactical measure. And that's what Sonny Edwards seems to be implying here. There's also another possibility. And like I say, we always play defense and prosecution here, so we're always trying to look at all the different angles. The other possibility is that Conor Benn is genuinely disgusted at the way this has been carried out because he doesn't feel like he's been given due process. He doesn't feel like he's been treated fairly. Again, this might be independent to the idea of innocence or guilt. I'll give you another analogy. Let's say you live in the UK, and typically speaking, for argument's sake, just for argument's sake, the typical sentence for a burglary, for instance, might be a caution and 100 hours of community service. Whereas when you get arrested, you're actually given 4 years in prison. And you look at this and you think, for stealing a bike from someone's front yard, 4 years in prison? There are people that are caught carrying knives and they don't get 4 years in prison, and their intent was to go and stab someone. And I'm going to get 4 years in prison for stealing a bike out of a front yard? When everybody else that does the sort of crime that I do is asked to clean up graffiti? That's not fair. And you'll be disgusted at the justice system. Well, in that case, you're still guilty. You stole. You recognize that you stole. But because it's unfair in the way that it's been carried out, if you're talking about statistical frequency and what is the typical precedent, you're going to have a beef with the authorities. Maybe this is what Conor Benn's done here. He's looked at this and thought they've not acted in the way they should be acting. Now, Hatman's done a video on this, and he's basically spoken about how it could be that it's a sign that Eddie Hearn no longer has the influence he used to have. He's losing his grip on power in British boxing. Regardless of what the reasons might be, if you're Conor Benn, you might still be unhappy with the way this whole thing's played out. And so you're getting rid of the license thinking, I'm not helping you guys make any more money in future. When I come back, whenever that might be, I refuse to fight under you. That could be it. Let me know what you think about that. Now, with regards to Eddie Hearn, we need to call him out on something which I find absolutely shocking. He gave an interview to ID Boxing, And he was asked about the sentiments shared by Chris EUBANK Sr. regarding the severity of the situation. He said he will not let sleeping dogs lie. He will not forget what has been done, that they have tried to murder his son. Now, listen, as terrible as this whole situation has been for the sport of boxing, as immoral as many people might find this whole saga, I really doubt that the aim of Eddie Hearn was to literally have Chris EUBANK Jr. murdered. This was not the aim of the Sauerlands either. I mean, from a sheer business perspective, it would make no sense for the Sauerlands to want to have their asset murdered, right? There has to be intent there. Now, I really do sympathise with the plight of Chris EUBANK Sr. What he's been through has been beyond heartbreaking. To lose a son, to feel impotent when it comes to your other son's fight career and you feel as though he's in danger. You can't imagine the level of stress this man has gone through. But because of that, I do not believe that he's observing this with clarity. Now, if he was to say they have been negligent and clearly do not care about the well-being of my son, they do not care whether he could potentially die, God forbid, well, then that would be a completely different allegation. And you would have to sympathise with Chris EUBANK Sr. and how he arrived at that conclusion. But to say that they're actively trying to kill him, I don't see the evidence for that. Nonetheless, Eddie Hearn gave an interview with ID Boxing, and when he was asked about this situation, instead of him coming out and saying, look, I totally appreciate that he's a father, he has love for his son, I believe that he has misinterpreted this situation, the truth will be revealed, and to put his position out there, that I would understand. It doesn't mean I would agree with him, but I would understand what he's saying. Here's my counter argument to why you believe that I was negligent with your son's life. However, what he came out and said is that he felt it was extremely distasteful from TalkSport to give an interview to Chris EUBANK Sr. Come again? This ain't the USSR, Eddie. You can't decide not to give people platforms with legitimate grievances under the guise of them not being psychologically reliable enough to give that grievance to the world. The reason he's not in a psychological state, which is great, or partially the reason for it, is precisely because of this situation. As George R.R. Martin once said, when you tear out a man's tongue, you are not proving him to be a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say. And that is what we're talking about when we're going down the route of censorship. When you see people that want to give a contrasting view and you silence them and you say things like, well, it's a private company, so it's not really censorship. We've seen a lot of authorities go down that route, right? Well, you know, you're not really censoring anybody. No one's really telling anyone they can't speak. They just can't speak on this platform because it's a private company. Even though that platform is the biggest platform, for instance, in the global public sphere. Well, TalkSport is the biggest radio show discussing sport in the whole of the UK. And you feel it's distasteful for them to give this man a platform? Behave, Eddie, please. Moving on from that, let's talk about Vasyl Lomachenko. He's been asked by Akan Barak who the best fighter is out of Gervonta Davis, Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney. One of the things I found very interesting is that they didn't mention Ryan Garcia, even though he fights on the zone. What was that all about? How can you leave Ryan out of there? I mean, we're all hoping that we get to see the Ryan Garcia versus Tank fight. I'm going to make another video regarding the whole saga there, but regarding this particular case, I found that interesting. Why would you leave him out? Well, regardless, Lomachenko gave his opinion and he said it's very difficult to say, they're all fantastic fighters, but that he feels it would probably be Shakur Stevenson. He's the only one that's never been in any sort of trouble, whereas Devin Haney was hurt against Linares. He's seen Tank in trouble before. With Stevenson, he's never seen that, and so he must have the best defense. Well, he's also sparred Shakur Stevenson. So clearly, Lomachenko is impressed by Shakur. He goes on to say the only way we can really know is if we all fight. So he's clearly saying he wants all that smoke with all these guys. But I find it interesting that Shakur is the one that he has said, that's the guy I feel was the top of the pile when it comes to these others. If Shakur Stevenson is the one that Loma himself sees as the biggest threat to him, maybe this lines up with what Paulie Malignaggi's been saying in terms of his theories. He feels that Lomachenko is going to essentially light up Devin Haney and take all his belts. And then when they start to see signs of decline, Top Rank are going to feed Lomachenko to the young lion in Shakur Stevenson so that he can take the belts off him and they can ensure that the titles stay with Top Rank. When the king is weak, Top Rank will put the dagger in the hand of the prince to stab him in the back and take the throne. Maybe this lines up with that in a sense that it betrays the innermost thoughts of Lomachenko. Maybe the innermost thoughts of Loma following their sparring session all those years ago is that the one guy who's a real threat, the top of the pile, is not actually a guy who's currently at lightweight. It's a guy who's coming up to this realm. It's Shakur Stevenson. Let me know what you think about that, ladies and gents, and all the things we've spoken about in this particular video. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching, everyone. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.